You know, we're not going to like dancing with everyone, and not everybody is going to want to dance with you or me. That's just the way it is. And I think that it's good to think about how is it that we make choices about who to dance with and what creates that amazing tango experience for us, and how I've always wanted to figure out like how to maximize that, right? Whenever we go to a big event or something, we try to curate our experience in a certain way because we're after something very specific. And what I've learned over the years of dancing tango is that we're all very specific in what we like and what we prefer. And tango dancers especially, I think it takes a particular type of breed of a person to dance tango. And even though some of us might think we don't have any preferences, anytime I try to ask a few more questions, if somebody says that to me, I realize that they're just not aware of how specific their preferences are. So the other day, I posed this question in my private community on Facebook, which if you're not part of that already, do check it out. The link is in the show notes. I asked the question of how do you predict dance chemistry? Are there any elements that you yourself personally watch for to figure out if it's going to be good dance chemistry or not? And it's interesting, most people interpreted that question in terms of knowing it from the point of view of having taken the embrace. Like most people will say that the moment you take the embrace, you can already tell what's going to happen. That first, sometimes 0.5, 0.2 seconds of time that you touch someone, you immediately know what the experience is going to be like. That's how sensitive we are, I think, as dancers, especially once you've been dancing for some time. But I ask, what about before you take the embrace, right? Like when you go somewhere and you look out on the sea of people, how do you decide who to ask or who might be a good match for you or not? And that's where I think most people are very cautious or shy in sharing their preferences because I think we judge it. Ultimately, for many dancers, I think everybody's trying to be more generous than we prefer. You know, like we want to be a good tango citizen and we want to contribute to the community growing. So we don't openly talk about like, hey, I really don't like dancing with tall dancers. You know, some people really, if you're a really short dancer, you might just not even look at dancers over a certain height because it's just not pleasant for you. And who would have a problem with that, right? Like we have these preferences. Some of them might appear more shallow than others, but I don't know. Over the years, I've realized that that's kind of what makes us special and unique as people, as our own tapestry of these preferences and what makes us individual. So I thought I'd do an episode on this idea of like, how do you interpret what you see on the dance floor? How do you learn to predict whether somebody's going to be a good match for you or not? Is it possible at all? Of course, anything I'm going to throw at you, you might have experiences where they contradict what I said because ultimately it's a gamble. Right? No matter how much time you've been dancing, I hope it continues to be this surprising sometimes, you know. I've had experiences in both directions where I look at somebody and I am so excited to dance with them because they check all the boxes on my whatever list in my mind. And then I take the embrace and I'm like, oh my God, this is going to be terrible. And then I've had the opposite where somebody strikes me as not even on my radar for certain reasons that are my own personal ones. And then I end up dancing with them and they totally blow my mind and completely change how I thought of them as a dancer. So those things are always happening, but I do think that very naturally with time, as we have experiences, different types of experiences with different people, we naturally develop a certain philosophy for ourselves of what kinds of dancers we really enjoy dancing with and what kinds of dancers we don't. And I do think this is somewhat of a very natural human trait. I think we do this throughout our lives in terms of how we choose relationships, how we choose friends. A really obvious example in my experience has been talking to other women about the men they like dating. And over the years, many of my girlfriends would share with me in secret about these different things, different quirks that were total deal breakers for them, that they would just, no matter how good the guy was on paper, if there was this one thing about them that really bothered my girlfriend, like they wouldn't be able to overcome it. They were very conflicted. And they were trivial things from the perspective of other people, perhaps looking on and observing. So, for example, crooked teeth or baldness or a certain physique, hairiness. Like there would be superficial things that somebody else might go, what do you mean? This guy's amazing in all these different ways. Why would you throw out the baby out with the bathwater, as they say? But for us as individuals, I think it's important to acknowledge that we have very specific things that we like and that we don't like. And our reality experience of our world is the only thing that we experience. Ultimately, when we're thinking about ideas of chemistry, dance chemistry, or chemistry with other people, that chemistry is something we're experiencing for ourselves, right? It's not, nobody else is going to feel it for you, and you're not going to feel anybody else's chemistry or their engagement with something. So there's nobody there to really judge you except yourself for your taste. In my mind, admitting to these preferences that are sort of ingrained in us, they develop as part of just our lives, us living our lives and developing our likes and dislikes. And we do that in life kind of unconsciously. I think we don't necessarily give it a lot of conscious decision-making power, but unconsciously they sort of drive our actions a lot of times. And I do think it very much extends it to tango. If nothing else, tango is the perfect playground to go into these aspects of ourselves to figure out what is it that we actually like and don't like. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about my own preferences. I'm going to go ahead and expose them, no matter how much judgment I think other people might have. Because I think when you hear some of them, I bet a lot of you are going to be like, yeah, I have one like that too. And my hope is that we pay attention to that, because it's a really good tool for figuring out how to make your tango more successful. When you really know what you like and don't like, it empowers you to make better choices and better decisions. Because nobody out there, no one dancer out there is amazing for everyone. I made up a saying, one dancer's dreamboat is another dancer's train wreck. It's very much like that. So it's good for us to know what are the deal breakers that really make our experience with someone unbearable. So you could dance with everybody, but there's sometimes you take the embrace and it's so unpleasant in some way that no matter how good, quote unquote, that dancer might be in somebody else's eyes, for you, you're not having a great time. And in that case, I say it's bad chemistry, right? So when I say chemistry in this podcast, when I talk about dance chemistry, what is it that I'm really talking about? To me, it's that feeling when I take the embrace and I can just go to that place internally that I associate with my tango space, my internal tango space, that pure dance state where everything is effortless and I'm totally with the music and everything works. The other person's definitely involved in that for me. They are there attached to me, but I don't know what they are experiencing compared to me. I don't know if they're experiencing the same thing. Sometimes they might actually not be enjoying it as much as I am, and vice versa. Like that can make you a little paranoid, but it's true when it comes to the depth of experience and intimacy that we feel individually. We sometimes forget that the other person is separate from us and they have their own experience. So dance chemistry is really more about self-reflection here and figuring out what are the parameters that allow you to feel great chemistry towards someone, what are the things that that prevent you from feeling that? Like the dancer might check off on all these ways, but if there's this one thing that they do or have or whatever, it sort of ruins it for you and you really can't access that state, that pure state. So that's going to be the parameters of the discussion. And I would love to hear some of your thoughts on that. Reach out to me on social media at I am SO Tango. I'm so Tango. I'm everywhere. Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, YouTube, you name it, I'm there. So would love to hear from you. Now, as I launch into this list, I want to sort of remind you that this is my own personal list that developed through experience. This is my lived experience that I learned over the years. These are the things that became important to me. And then the second part is that they are not set in stone. Just because these are elements that I look for, ultimately, they're just indicators of possible outcomes. They're not set in stone as hard facts. And they might also change over time. I haven't thought of that, but I just thought, yeah, it's possible that these things also evolve over time as you evolve as a dancer. So I'm going to divide this up into leaders and followers because I dance both roles. And now I've been dancing both roles long enough that I have very concrete set of preferences on both. I'm going to start with the leaders, and I'll start with the most surface ones, most surface-oriented indicators of whether I am going to have good chemistry with the dancer. Number one for me at this point is sweat. So, for example, there are many, many dancers that I know that I love dancing with, but I can't really go to that state fully that I love, that will indicate to me this great chemistry with him or her, if there's a lot of sweat. So whenever I see a dancer who's like dripping and their shirt is soaked, I tend to steer clear of those dancers. And I always appreciate these days when guys bring like a little handkerchief that they use to wipe off their sweat in between songs. I would add to that, if you are the type of guy who needs to do that, bring an extra shirt as well. So that's just something I think I want to put out there as a general rule, because I think we lose track once we dance for a while, and there are a lot of guys who tend to sweat quite a bit. And it's not necessarily the sweat itself, although that's enough to kind of turn me off, but also to me, in my mind, based on the experiences I've had, when I see a lot of sweat, a lot of times it also equals smell. And I would say that smell is that more important thing that my brain is, I don't know, focused on because it's something that I cannot control at all. There's nothing I can do to adjust to someone's bad smell. And it's very hard to work with, right? You might have someone who is dressed up and looking nice and beautiful or handsome, and you're just looking forward to dancing with them so much. And then you take an embrace and realize that you're going to have to like hold your breath or think about Indian food the whole time. I don't know. It happens quite a bit. And yeah, I think I was trying to use this podcast as a way to broadcast this for everyone. Please make sure your BO and your smell is in check. Sometimes I've noticed too, they'll like eat right before coming, and it's obvious because I'm smelling a burrito or onions on the breath. And I know that it doesn't seem like it's that much, you know, like when you eat yourself, like you're not smelling it on yourself, but other people can. And so for me, visually, if I look out on the dance floor, a lot of times, a lot of sweat equals smell. And to me, smell is, I've learned there's nothing I can do. If there is bad smell from the person, that's just bad chemistry. And I will avoid dancing with them again. And when I was in Buenos Aires, I was warned that men in Buenos Aires have historically been iconic in the awful smell of their breath. I was warned by multiple people, and it's true. And I gotta tell you, it's like no chemistry there. If I'm smelling some sort of nasty odor, it's like my brain is somewhere else. Now, I'll also include something that is going to be more peculiar to me. I think a lot of people will echo me on my plea for better smelling bodies and breath. But this one's going to be a little bit more peculiar to me. And that's long hair, length of hair, or a lot of facial hair. I was scarred early on in my experience where I danced with a dancer who had very long hair and he wore it down. And once again, it connected to the smell. There was just something really gross about that experience. Like, it was not a good experience. So from then on, my brain is sort of primed for like, okay, if I see somebody with long hair, it's a red flag. So I'm usually kind of like, I'm not sold. I'm not necessarily, they're not completely off the radar. Maybe if there's other things about them that are interesting, I'm going to keep watching. But a lot of times it will be very much like, nope, I don't want that, right? Because to me, it's a red flag. And I just don't even want that possibility. Yes, it's possible that I might take the embrace and it'll be okay. But I don't want to take that chance, you know? And maybe that's where some of the judgment might come from some people, because they're like, well, you're just like cutting out all these people who might have long hair. And I'm like, yeah, I get it. I mean, even with followers with long hair, I haven't gotten to the followers, but I'll just mention with hair. There are followers who have very, very long hair that kind of goes down their back, and they don't put it up. They wear it down. If I lead that, it's very hard to dance with, because if the hair is on top of my arm, it's like 1,000,000 degrees on my arm. Seriously, I feel like I'm wearing fur. So it gets really sweaty. Then the hair kind of sticks to my arm. And, you know, you kind of get my drift here with the whole sweat and thing, the wetness thing. I don't know. Maybe it's post-COVID. I haven't recovered. I haven't gotten used to a lot of sweat. But at this point, that's kind of what I watch for. So if it's a woman whose hair is down, it's like really long, that'll be like, okay, I'm not going to go there, because I know that it's not going to produce a fun experience for me. Okay, so now that we're done with the really surface stuff, the next quality is going to be, again, somewhat particular to me, but I think overall most people have preferences around this, and that's posture for men, especially posture, because posture is an indicator of comfort, right? When I see certain postural habits, to me, in my brain, I automatically have a memory, a physical reference of what it feels like to dance with that posture. And over time, I've learned what kinds of posture are not very comfortable for me to dance with. Again, for some people, that same person who has posture that sort of is a red flag for me, for other people, it might not be a big deal. But on the whole, I would say 90% of followers that I'll talk to do mind if leaders have their head too forward. That posture right there is a red flag for me, because it doesn't feel as comfortable for me. There's certain compromises I have to do in my body. So I wouldn't say it's an automatic no, although sometimes it is, but not necessarily. There's other things I'm going to be looking for, because if somebody's posture is really bad, let's say it's very misaligned, but their dance is very conservative and they don't do a lot of flashy stuff, then it actually can be quite nice. And I've had amazing dances with men who had very bad posture, but somehow it just worked out in our dimensions in terms of like how tall they are, how tall I am, how big they are. Like, it just works. So it's not 100%, as I said, but if I'm looking out at the sea of people on the dance floor, posture is the thing that I see most prominent. It's kind of like, it's whether somebody gets on my list or not. When I see a man dancing with very nice posture, especially like the head up, and especially if they're tall, because taller dancers have much more likely habit of pushing their head forward and distorting their posture. But when I see that like height of the spine and really erect spine, it's just so attractive to me. I mean, to me, good posture is such an indicator of a good time. This, of course, goes for women and men when it comes to dance. It's just so nice, because when my partners, especially my leader's posture, is good, then I have the most access to my body. I have the fullest range of motion. I feel most comfortable. I have the most amount of space inside the embrace. And I can really connect. I can really connect with the music and connect with my partner. If the posture is not great, a lot of times it will be, I'll be compromising, and I still enjoy it. I would say there's a gradation of chemistry, right? There might be like extreme amazing chemistry where everything is incredible, and then there's like a little step down where it's like, yeah, there's still chemistry, but there's a little bit of work involved here. So moving on from posture, the next thing that I watch for is, this is for leaders in particular, is the level of tension in their body and the level of tension in their embrace. Sometimes I can see a little tremor in the open side of the embrace. For the leaders, the left arm, the left kind of bicep to wrist area. If I see a lot of like muscular action, you can see muscles bulging inside the arm sometimes, that to me is a red flag. I don't like to feel a lot of arm involvement. Leaders who lead from the arms by utilizing arm strength is not as pleasant as leaders who use their center and their gravity of their body and just their frame to move around. The level of tension that you might perceive in the frame around the neck and shoulders, and the activity that you might see in the arms whether the elbows are extending and bending, Those are all signs of the leader using their arms to lead. Versus a leader who does not do that, there's this stillness about them. And you can kind of see it. It's very quiet up top. You don't see a lot of tension, and you might see a lot of activity in their feet, but up top, it's very peaceful. When I see that, when I see the quality of an embrace that's got a lot of quietness in the embrace, to me, automatically, I'm like, that's it. That's what I want. I look for that. That's a great sign for me that I'm going to enjoy it. When I look out on the dance floor and I see a leader who's got a lot of tension in their arms, and then they're doing a lot of different things and moving erratically, to me, that's a red flag. I'm like, I'm not going to have a good time dancing with that because I just don't enjoy that. I've learned over the years that that's not the style of dancing that I like. So in addition to that level of tension in the arms, there's also the size of movement, the size of steps, right? As I just mentioned. So looking at the leader's movement on the dance floor, and are they stepping in such a way that is making the follower run after them, which I see quite a bit? That's always a red flag to me. You know, when I'm looking at a couple and I'm seeing the followers struggle to keep up with the leader, that's a no-no in my book. I know I'm not going to enjoy that. A couple of things that connect to that, which will round up my list of things I look for in leaders. Floorcraft, the ability to stay in the line of dance and not disrupt the people around. That's a huge piece that I look for. And I would even say in some settings, I would say that trumps everything else. Because if it's really crowded and the dancer that you're thinking about dancing with, like they have everything, they check all the boxes, but their floorcraft sucks, you're going to be so stressed the whole time, because if they're going to bump into people or you're going to be stepped on, it's just so stressful. So to me, I don't even try. I don't give that person a chance at all. Like, I think now that I'm describing this, that's kind of like the one thing that I would basically use to definitively say no to someone right away, is if I see them not stay in the line of dance well. So this is my list for leaders. Now, when it comes to followers, of course, there's going to be overlap there. But there are some specific things for followers that I look for that have become really important. One of them is the shape of the embrace. And lately, in particular, whenever I see in close embrace, the follower's left arm, so the closed side of the embrace, be on top of the leader's right arm. So in close embrace, you can either put the arm all the way around the shoulder. So I'm sort of showing this on video if you're watching. So you can either put the arm all the way around the shoulder of the leader, so the hand rests more kind of like on their left shoulder, towards their left shoulder perhaps, which can be an issue sometimes if the leader is much taller than you. If I see that instead the follower's arm is more propped on the side of the leader, where their left arm is pinning the right arm of the leader down, to me, that is a huge red flag, because lately I've noticed it's one of the most painful things to work with. I have a lot of soreness after dancing with someone like that. I can't adjust to it. Any of these things that I'm talking about, well, most of them, there are ways that I might work with it. So if there's a follower who really wants to dance with me and they have this quality, I might go into open embrace with them, and that will be a way I can compromise. But nonetheless, when I'm looking out on the dance floor, that's a red flag that I'm kind of like, maybe I'm not going to seek out that person. In addition, there's this next level of awareness when it comes to that embrace quality, and that is just the level of tension for followers. If I see a follower who has a lot of muscular activation and embrace and the frame is kind of rigid, it's typically because they're losing balance. And I know that sometimes the tension in the embrace happens because of the leaders. So that's another subtle distinction that perhaps is not very visible to someone who's just starting tango. But whenever I watch dancers, it's pretty clear to me whether it's because the follower doesn't have their axis and they're having trouble balancing versus it's because the leader is pulling them off axis and making it difficult for them to balance. But in either case, I wouldn't say that this particular aspect of followers automatically prevents me from dancing with them. It's not like I'm just going to not include them on my list of potential dancers, but it is definitely something I clock and I account for. So if I'm feeling really weak that day and tired, and maybe I'm achy or sore, and I just don't have the physical stamina to support someone like that in this way, I might strategize and either sort of stay out of their line of capaceo, or if I do dance with them, I choose a tanda that will be easier for me to manage, like Disarli. To me, honestly, Disarli, maybe not the fastest Milonguero style Disarli, but most Disarli feels very comfortable for me to dance with lots of different types of followers, no matter what level they are and whatever embrace technique things they might have that don't work very well. I can make it work with a Disarli. So I'll strategize in that way. And, you know, my preferences in this way inform my decisions about how to go about it. So I try to find a balance between sort of like what I really want and what satisfies me, what's available, and then where I'm actually at that day in terms of how much work I'm willing and capable of putting out in order to find that chemistry, right? Because we're always hunting for that tango high with someone. Now, with followers, I also look down the line. So when we're thinking about the follower's body and the embrace is sort of the first place I kind of look, you can tell a lot of what's happening in the embrace by what's happening below the embrace. So the alignment of the spine, whether or not the knees are locked, whether or not the pelvis is pitched forward. Are they walking on their toes? That's like a really big one, because if the follower is on their toes, meaning they're on their ball mount, they're not putting their heel on the ground, which happens quite a bit with follower technique for some reason. Even I had this misconception when I first started dancing that you're supposed to just dance on the ball of your foot. That is a great indicator of some of the qualities that you're going to see in the embrace, because all of these things that I mentioned will compromise your balance. If I see a follower who has these qualities of misalignment in the spine, and then the knees are locked and they're dancing on their ball of their foot, I know it's painful to dance with someone like that. It's very difficult as a leader to make that dance comfortable. And sometimes I do end up dancing with dancers like that. I don't have great chemistry with them, but there's a different reason why I might be dancing with them. And I want to introduce that aspect of it, that I'm not saying that just because you know you're going to have great chemistry with someone or not great chemistry with someone, that's really the final reason why you might dance with them or you might not. I've had so many instances where I'm dancing with somebody with, let's say, bad dance chemistry, where it doesn't work. I'm in pain. It's not very fruitful. I don't like the music. Like, let's say all of these things are really bad. But then my partner has an amazing time. Like they're in heaven. They're just glowing. They appreciate it so much that I dance with them, and they appreciate the level of freedom that they feel in their body, and sort of they have this aura around them. And experiencing that is sometimes more satisfying than having great chemistry with someone. And it's definitely something that you have to be open to. You can't be attached to any kind of result. So sometimes you have a terrible time dancing with somebody and it's terrible all across the board and nothing is redeeming about it. And sometimes it's terrible, but in this wonderful way. And I'll share a funny story about that in a minute. With followers also, there's something that I watch, and that is the size of their steps in relation to what the leader's leading. So if I see a follower who's really outstepping what the leader is leading, and typically these are also followers who do a lot of embellishments, and that probably is kind of a funny one. There's a lot of jokes about it. There's a lot of chit chat about it. Followers who just throw boleos and do whatever they want. And yeah, I've danced with some followers like that. And it's a really interesting experience because they're kind of in their own little world. It's kind of cute sometimes. It's also confusing and frustrating, but they are also out there. Those kinds of dancers, they might be new to tango. They might be coming from other dance forms that have more of that showy quality. So they bring that to tango. And a lot of times they just don't know yet. They don't know what they don't know. They don't know the difference. This is familiar. This is what they see on Dancing with the Stars. They see it on stage. So they think that's what it means to dance tango, is to throw boleos and ganchos and do these very extreme types of tango aesthetical movements. And if I end up dancing with somebody like that, it's a practice of just embracing what is without necessarily judging the fact that it's hard. Like I whenever that happens, like I acknowledge it. I'm like, you know what? This is hard. It's hard to dance with this person. I don't like it. I'm not having a good time. It's okay to acknowledge that to yourself while you're also dancing with the person and giving them everything that you have available, doing the best that you can. I kind of think of it in those terms lately because I think we fall in this trap of holding ourselves to such a high standard a lot of times that if we are not generous all the time and we don't put out our best effort all the time, that there's something defective about us as dancers. And sometimes my best is not my best overall, right? Sometimes you can bring your best to the table and your best is just managing. I'll sometimes dance with somebody who really wants to dance with me and they're so excited to dance with me, and I'm not excited to dance with them, and I dance with them, and I feel that difference. I feel that they're really excited and I'm not excited at all. So when I end up dancing with somebody who has these qualities where they're just sort of throwing their own stuff around and doing all these embellishments, I accept that for what it is, but I also clock it as like, okay, watch out. This person dances this way. And in the future, like it definitely plays into my decision making. With the embellishments too and the sizes of steps, a lot of times there's also that quality of falling that I see in dancers. So if I see the follower falling into their steps a lot, and again, sometimes that's because the leader is pulling them around, but other times it's not because of the lead, it's because of some sort of those misalignments that are happening. It happens a lot with when the knees are locked. The knees are locked and the pelvis is tilted forward, which happens kind of together. There's a lot of that quality that the follower can't quite catch up with themselves and they end up falling into their steps a lot. So those things stand out to me technically if I'm looking at the dance floor. All of the things that I talked about with leading and following, they're all potential indicators. This is how I look at the dance floor. This is how I'm filtering information. But definitely it's never guaranteed that it's going to be the way you expect. I do think that with time, as you dance and you have your own experiences, bad and good, you learn more and more about yourself. And you develop a sort of intuition, you know? It'll just be like this gut instinct where somebody might be standing next to you and going like, oh my God, I really want to dance with that person right there. And you look at that person, you're like, oh, I don't want to dance with that at all. And you'll just have this, I don't know, gut instinct. And the other person might say like, why wouldn't you want to dance with them? And you're just like, I don't know. There's something there. There's something there that repulses me in this moment. I don't want to dance with that person. So I'm going to share a couple of instances where this gut instinct really played into my experience. One was when I was in Buenos Aires and I saw a gentleman in the milonga. He tried to capseo me, but I at that point had watched him for a while, and there were these things that were really standing out to me. I kind of clocked it, and I was like, I don't want to dance with this person. I kind of have a sense that I'm not gonna like it. And I kept watching him dance because he was sort of adamant. He kept trying to catch my eye. And I just kept thinking, no, I don't think I'm going to like it. It feels bad. When I look at him, it feels bad to me. So then I'm at La Viruta, of course, where everything happens at La Viruta. Everything that's meaningful happens at La Viruta. So I'm at La Viruta. I'm sitting next to a pretty well-established teacher in the US who I've been admiring from afar for a long time. She was there and I was kind of starstruck, you know. This was early days of tango for me, where being in the same room with tango professionals was like, whoa, I'm like in the presence of celebrities. And so this woman is sitting next to me and I'm like, I'm watching everything she does because at this point I'm brand new. She's this very seasoned dancer. She really knows her way around. She knows the scene. So I'm sort of watching her from a corner of my eye. And she ends up accepting the capaceo of this guy. And I was like, what? Why would she accept a capaceo from him? I was so like curious. So I watch her dance with him. And I kept thinking, maybe there's something I'm missing. Maybe he's good. You know, maybe I'm just not like seasoned enough to know. I mean, she's a professional dancer. So I spent so much time thinking about this. I'm telling you, I was like, I couldn't believe it. So a couple of days later, I'm at a different milonga at Canning, Salon Canning, and this guy is there. So I'm like, I got to dance with him. I got to know how he feels because maybe I'm not in the know yet. So we go on the dance floor and we take the embrace, and I kid you not, the moment he embraced me, I was like, oh my God, this is terrible. I felt like I was inside of a claw. Like there was so much rigidity in his frame, and he was squeezing me so tight that like it took my breath away how uncomfortable it was. And so I learned two things in that moment. Number one was that I was right. My gut instinct was right. It doesn't negate the fact that she might have had a good time with him. It's possible that she enjoyed it more and they had better chemistry. But for me, my gut was correct. And the next insight that I had after I was like, okay, I was right. The next insight was, I'm about to dance the worst tanda of my life. in this way of like it being so uncomfortable and so painful. And as I was stepping in those first few moments and was realizing the level of suffering I just signed up for, I kind of laughed to myself, because then I was like, you know what? This is tango too. This is just as tango as everything else. Having a really bad tanda and a really bad experience is sort of part of the color of the painting. You know, it exists alongside with some of your best times. And the more I felt it, I thought, just because this is the worst tanda doesn't mean that I don't dance it. The music is still there to be danced. And that was like the words in my head, I remember, as I was sort of recognizing this, as like, the music still needs to be danced, even though you feel so disconnected and it's so painful and it's so uncomfortable. The music is playing and it demands to be danced. So you better find a way to dance it. And it was such a striking thought for me at the time that I ended up really having a great time in a way, because by the end of that tanda, I went and I sat down next to this woman that I had met just recently. I sat down next to her and I'm just laughing, and she's like, "Was that good?" Because, you know, that's what we do, right? How was it? Was that good? Was that guy good? And I was like, I laughed and I was like, that was the worst tanda of my life. And I just laughed. And she was like, "Why are you laughing?" And so I actually told her this sort of philosophical insight I just had about, like, you can just laugh because, you know, this is a funny experience in a way. Like, it's just part of that absurdity of how good and how bad it can be. And that's sort of a metaphor for life, right? About relationships, about how we relate to each other. It can work really well, or it can be really bad and toxic. So that's my little anecdote. And I'm not suggesting that that's something that you need to seek out on purpose, that just because you can learn these philosophical truths and have a more yogic perspective on your suffering doesn't mean you need to seek it out. And of course, I never danced with that guy again. And of course, from then on, I'm like a hawk watching people's postures and embraces, because I have a sense for it. I have a feeling in my gut for myself, for my body, of different things that I see that are indicators that I might not like something. You have to be open to all of it. I think the lesson of social tango, no matter how much we try to control our experiences, we have to dance a lot. We have to dance with a lot of people, and we have to dance frequently. Obviously, if you're listening and you're someone who goes out to dance once a month or once a week, you have a lot of expectation for those few hours. And so to you, having 3 bad tandas in one night might feel really depressing, because you're like, man, this is my one night a month, my one night a week, and why am I getting all these terrible tandas? So it's a little different. The scale is a little different for you. But if you're dancing several nights a week, that's probably your best opportunity to learn more and more about yourself, more and more about your preferences, and also to learn how to strategize at the milonga. Ultimately, why is it useful to even go through this process? Why are we even talking about it, right? Because it's good for us to understand what makes us thrive as dancers, what makes us feel the most satisfied. It's not so one-dimensional that just because you get a bunch of dances means you're happy, right? There's this quality thing that we're after, and it's very ambiguous. You can't pinpoint it. It's different with different people. But with time and your experience with dancing, you get to know more and more about your preferences and what works with your body. And you can make decisions that are informed by that wisdom. And that's really the way I found my path into being happy in tango, because as I've talked about multiple times, I quit tango at some point because I was experiencing so much of that frustration and tension around not having the experience that I want, of sitting around, of waiting to get the tandas that I want, of not having access to the level of dancing that I wanted, or not having experiences of musicality that I wanted. And, it's easy to think it's like, oh, I'm just not in the right place, or I'm just not wearing the right thing, or it's just because there's not enough good dancers here. It's easy to put it on the external world and say, oh, I'm just a victim of my circumstances, and therefore, I got to go look somewhere else. But a lot of times you don't have that privilege. You don't have that, those resources or the time to go outside of your community and look for other sources of your tango bliss. You got to do it where you are. And to do it where you are, you got to be practical, right? Because all communities across the United States, at least, I think, are pretty much the same. You'll always have a large majority of dancers who are middle of the road, intermediate, maybe just above beginner, or you might have a lot of seasoned dancers who are very limited in what they know and they've been dancing the same way. And then you'll have a small percentage of very, very high level dancers who really dedicate a lot of time. Social tango is made up of those. And the level of chemistry and the kind of chemistry you're going to develop with these different types of dancers is yours to curate, yours to be in charge of. And there's a lot of power in that when we own it. I think leaders have to do this naturally because leaders are the ones who are initiating the capaceo. So for leaders, they're not even thinking about it. They're doing this all the time unconsciously. They're choosing, right? They're making decisions based on certain factors of whether what's available or what they like. And as followers, I think a lot of times we might not do the same rigor. We might not study ourselves with the same rigor because we're on the receiving end. But I think it's so empowering to do this for both and to be clear about what we like and what makes us really happy. And the more we can be aware of that and be clear with that, the more we can attract it. So let me know how all of this is landing for you. I would love to hear how you're thinking about these things. So reach out to me and we'll continue this banter next week. Until then, ciao.